Great news. You just accepted an offer on your home. You and the buyer are done negotiating on the terms and price of the deal, and you're one step closer to the closing table. But here's the truth. The deal's not done yet. Right now, we're seeing a lot of deals fall apart during the under contract phase. Today, I'm going to use a story that I tell some of my sellers to make sure that they get to the finish line. And then after that, I'm going to follow up with the top 5 reasons buyers don't get to the closing table. A few years ago, I had a seller that went under contract. Everything looked great. The deal looked awesome. But then the buyer did their inspection and the report came in and there was things on it that the seller didn't even know about. The buyer got cold feet and they walked away from the deal. That deal still happened. We negotiated terms. But today I'm going to talk about different things you can do as a seller to prepare for something like this and make sure this doesn't happen to you. Because ultimately, the seller did have to make some concessions that they weren't aware of, and the deal wasn't as pleasant for them as it could have been. The first thing you want to address when listing your home on the market is things that could be considered an inspection issue later on. The most common way we address this is by doing a walkthrough of your home and deciding whether or not your home qualifies for a pre-listing inspection. This is kind of like a home inspection before you go on the market. The inspector will point out different things about your house that you should address now, because if found out later, could cause problems in the deal. However, if you agree to do the pre-listing inspection, it's important that you do make the suggested repairs from the report. By making these repairs, you give the buyer a sense of clarity on what they're buying, and they also know that you're invested in making sure the home is in great condition for them. This eliminates future surprises and shows the buyers that you're just as invested in getting this deal done as they are. Surprises are the quickest way to kill a deal. The second most common way that deals fall apart is the buyer's financing didn't come through. A good listing agent is going to look at more than just the pre-approval letter when the buyer brings an offer to your home. They're going to call the lender, they're going to ask good questions about that lender's financing ability, and they're going to make sure that they have everything they need to make sure to get to the closing table. They're also going to vet the lender. If it's a lender they've worked with before, they're going to have a higher chance of knowing whether or not that deal is going to get to the closing table. If it's a lender that the listing agent isn't familiar with, it's important that the listing agent talk to them about their ability to finance and vet that lender just like they would vet a buyer for your house. Asking the lender the right questions now could set the deal up for success and make sure you don't have any surprises going forward. The third most common way to kill a deal is a low appraisal. If the appraisal comes in below the purchase price that you and the buyer agreed to, the lender will not cover the difference. This can be overcome in a couple different ways. The buyer can bring more cash to the deal, or you can lower the purchase price of the property. This is one of the reasons that pricing your home correctly to start with is so important. A good listing agent is going to know whether or not that the purchase price is going to fall in line with the appraisal and be able to address it up front. You can put contingencies in the contract like appraisal gap language or other things that might limit the buyer's ability to terminate for a low appraisal ahead of time, so that if a low appraisal comes in, you're still set up to make it to the closing table. If you set the expectation correctly and the listing agent knows what your home might appraise for, this shouldn't be a concern going forward. The fourth most common way that a deal falls apart is buyer's remorse. Not every cancellation of a deal is about money. Sometimes it's about emotion. In reality, there isn't "I change my mind" clause at the part of the contract, but the Colorado Real Estate Commission's contract is very buyer friendly and it has a lot of objections that the buyer can use to get out of the deal. The truth of the matter is, buyer's remorse happens. A lot of buyers feel it, especially first timers. But if you do the right things, you can try to limit the amount of remorse that the buyers feel. You should keep lines of communication open. You should keep the house looking good, even throughout the contract period, so that if the buyer drives by or they come over for another showing, it still looks as good as the day they saw it during the showing period. You keep the timelines quick so that it eliminates the amount of time between the time the buyer went under contract to the time they went to closing. And you work with a great buyer's agent who's gonna forewarn the buyer that they might have some remorse come up, and they will address it when it comes. And the final way that most deals fall apart is that the contract has too many contingencies. Every if or but in the contract adds risk. And it's important to know whether or not these are important to the buyer or they're just extras that the buyer doesn't really need to feel good about buying your house. Some of these include, if I sell my house, I'll buy your house. If the inspection goes a certain way, then I'll buy this house. But also just too much time between contingencies can also be the kiss of death on any deal. There's no reason a buyer should need 3 weeks to do an inspection on a normal transaction. There's no reason a buyer should need more than 3.5, 4 weeks to get their loan approval. There's absolutely no reason that a buyer should need more than a week or two to review due diligence documents or title work. If you get an offer and these timelines are extended, do your best with your listing agent to negotiate these back down and keep the timeline quick. And ask your listing agent, does the buyer actually need these contingencies to make this deal work? More contingencies mean more reasons for the buyer to back out, and limiting these to the fewest number possible is going to set you up for success and make sure that your deal gets to the closing table. This is why you can't just focus on price, but you got to look at the terms of the entire deal. Those are the top ways that we see deals fall apart, and some quick little reminders on how you can get past them. But remember, getting under contract is exciting. You have a buyer that's ready, willing, and able to buy your home. But don't get ahead of yourself. Make sure that when you're negotiating the terms of your offer, it makes sense for you and that it has the highest possible chance of making it to the closing table. That's why working with us, we've done this before many times, and we know what's coming around the corner. If you're thinking of selling your home, give us a call. We're happy to help.